Welcome to the podcast. It's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist. The Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by Trainer Road. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee, and we have a totally different setup here going on today. We have
keeping it fresh.
Exactly right.
Team I won the arm wrestling contest for this seat.
So you're on that side.
So that's why you're in the short chair.
That's Team Cliff Bar Racing and Trainer Road's Pete Morris.
Howdy, guys.
And our head coach, Chad Zimmerman.
Hey, everybody.
Our CEO, Nate Pearson, is out of the office this week. So we got Pete to fill in, and we've got some specific questions that I think are going to be great for Pete to answer.
I hope so.
Yes. It'll be fantastic. We are going to answer the questions you submitted at trainerroad.com/podcast. And you can submit those at any point, and we come through them every week to find those good questions that you submit. And then we put together a list of them, do research, and go through the whole process to hopefully bring you a good podcast that's informative. And the entertaining part's totally up to you. Well, that's in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. So, but first things first, we need to wish good luck to everybody doing Dirty Kansas. Mm-hmm. Hopefully the weather calms down over there. It's been crazy, and hopefully it's not a muddy race, but it looks like it might be.
That's going to keep it exciting.
Yep. Right? Team Cliff Bar Racing's and also Envy's AJ Turner did it last year, but I was talking to him, and he said that he's actually kind of more scared about supporting the race this year in the mud than he is racing it because he's wondering about all the chaos that could happen.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just... I don't even want to. I won't even imagine it.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Yeah, good luck.
So good luck to everybody doing that.
Good luck.
Good luck to a friend of the podcast, also Jeff Kabush, who's doing that. And I think that, Jeff, we're all looking forward to seeing your kit. So we're looking forward to you unveiling that.
I did see the hype post of the outfit he's wearing for the presentation of the kit is pretty outstanding.
Yes.
So he's going deep.
It's going to be fantastic. The other thing we have to do is a belated congratulations to Sofia Gomez Villafanier and Rose Grant, members of the Stands Pivot team presented by Maxxis. And we are a team sponsor as well here at Trainer Road, because at Grand Junction Off-Road, I failed to mention, they were both on the podium there as well. So pretty exciting stuff. And Sofia just barely got beat out by Katarina Nash on the sprint finish for the Fat Tire Crit. They've been sprinting against each other like almost every race this year. So, and Katarina finally nipped Sofia there. So, but congrats. And that was an awesome race there. And the other big congratulations we have to give is to Chloe Woodruff, who was also on that team.
That was exciting.
Yeah, super exciting. If you don't know, you can watch Cross Country World Cup racing has started this year. They're 2 rounds into, I think, a 7-round series or maybe an 8-round series. Could be wrong. But a lot of races, and the last one was in the Czech Republic at Novo Mesto, and they have a short track race that they do 2 days before the cross-country Olympic race. And short track's usually like 20 minutes, and it's just like all-out racing. It's usually a relatively flatter course than the cross-country Olympic, and then you've got some pavement sections to keep the speed high, that sort of thing.
And you get World Cup points, and they use it to seed the front 3 rows of riders.
Yeah, which is super important. They used to never do that. It was just entirely based off of UCI points.
That's pretty interesting.
But now that's much more important. So it makes guys try a little harder, guys and gals try a little harder than perhaps before we're like, I can just coast through the short track. So, and the points count toward the overall classification for the whole year too, which is cool. But Chloe won. And that was huge.
Yeah, that was a bold move.
Yeah, super bold move. So we'll be writing a blog post all about this. It'll be up on blog.trainerroad.com within the next 7 days or so. You'll definitely see it, but it'll be up there, and it'll be in forum.trainerroad.com as well, where we actually are going to use the analytics tools on Trainer Road to go into Chloe's performance, because she, of course, being on the Stands Pivot team presented by Maxxis, she also uses Trainer Road and has all of her info in there and everything else. So it's pretty interesting. I've already looked at it just to give you some teasers. So you should check out the race, first of all. You can do that at Red Bull, redbull.tv, I believe, is the spot where you can go to check it out. And then you just go to like live events and click on Novo Mesto, and you'll be able to find short track. But she broke away with 3 laps to go in a 9-lap race. And to give you an idea of the overall race, it was 5.1 watts per kilogram for 22 minutes. She's a really, really small person. She rides an extra small bike. And so she weighs about 110 pounds, just under 50 kilograms. So she's really small, but she had a peak power of nearly 900 watts when she snapped, which is crazy for such a small person, right?
Yeah.
And her max heart rate She said the highest she's seen is somewhere around 195, and her max heart rate during that race was 195, but her average was 180. So she was basically just like hovering the whole time right up there, which is super impressive. So we'll have a full analysis and kind of a breakdown. It'll be super interesting, and it gives us an insight into what it takes to win at that sort of level. It's really cool, and I highly recommend pairing it with the race videos, and you can kind of see some stuff behind that too. So. Yeah. Pretty exciting stuff. And good luck to Keegan Swenson, the other member of that team, who is racing this weekend in Poland, getting some more Olympic points, some valuable Olympic points. Yeah. So, okay, with that, last week, Chad, we talked about, or last week or perhaps the week before, I believe, we talked about, or somebody had a question.
I think it was last week we had a live question.
Yep, exactly right.
Specifically about diabetics and hydration and nutrition advice, and we basically had nothing. Nothing we felt safe sharing with them. And this is information specific to type 2 diabetics, but I don't know why it wouldn't apply to type 1s as well. And it's just some low-level hydration and one little bit of nutrition advice. And in terms of hydration, if you're looking for hydration rather than carbohydrate in your bottle, you use a low-carbohydrate fluid. And we got Osmo and Scratch and just other...
tons of them.
Yeah, plenty to choose from, as long as it's low carbohydrate, meaning it's 3 to 4% mixture in a whatever size bottle. And the recommendation is to use those because they're typically a glucose-sucrose blend, which simple sugars glucose is as simple as it gets, and then sucrose is just a fructose-glucose blend, which means you get a bit of fructose in there, so you got that. Not that you're exceeding the 60 grams per hour sort of absorption, so it's not as big a concern. But anyway, those stand to work quite well for type 2 diabetics, and the recommendation is to mix them half strength. So you're really toning them down to 1.5 to 2%, and then go from there. You may see, depending on the intensity, and of course a lot of this is going to be intensity relative, but start low and go from there, see what works for you. Yeah. And then in terms of food, that's just really a lot of trial and error. I mean, diabetics, they're going to have to figure, and this is again based on intensity, based on what their stomachs tolerate, based on a number of things. But I did see in a number of forums, and one resource in particular recommended UCAN super starch for diabetics because it metabolizes so slowly, doesn't spike blood sugar like most of those other manufactured foods do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's something to consider. I'm not saying we recommend those things, but a little information at least to work with, since last week we had just about nothing.
I think all of us that know athletes or all of us probably know athletes that have some sort of diabetes and train through this whole thing, but we're hesitant to just throw out whatever works for them because it's very much an individual approach.
It's fraught with potential issue, a lot of potential issue if we get it wrong, if you get it wrong.
Yeah, exactly right. And then also, we also wanted to add on some stuff about exercise and pregnancy as well.
Yeah, I came across this just random reading other things, but we talked a lot about exercise and pregnancy and how you can get away with just about anything. You can start exercising during pregnancy, you can continue your exercise, probably don't notch it up, but made a number of recommendations. So if that applies to you, if you're interested, check out last week's podcast. One thing I didn't mention was this thing that I did come across, which talked about exceeding core temperature of 38.3 Celsius, 101 Fahrenheit, which is a pretty easy thing to do as an endurance athlete. If you do this within the first 6 weeks of pregnancy, you risk something that's called a neural tube defect. And apparently, didn't know this, the early spinal cord in a child is flat. It's a flat layer of cells, and it rolls into a tube at roughly 28 days. So we're talking about 4 weeks into the pregnancy, and high core temperatures can actually impact this process.
Interesting.
So it's a tough one because a lot of people don't know they're pregnant a few weeks in. So that's a big issue. Endurance athletes, women endurance athletes, have amenorrhea, dysmenorrhea. Either way, they have all sorts of not dysfunction, but timing issues with, or maybe they are amenorrheic. I'm not going to butcher that, but maybe they've stopped menstruating. And again, these are things that make it even tougher to say, I think I might be pregnant. I think I need to steer clear of hot weather or elevating my core temperature for these initial 6 weeks.
Yeah. Interesting to know.
Yeah.
And we'll actually link to the sources of information that we come across on forum.trainerroad.com. Just look for episode 206, and you can find them in there. Should we get into Greg's question? Yeah. We have a lot to cover this week, so we'll just rip through them quickly. Right. Greg says, no question today, but wanted to thank you for the top-notch podcast. Forgive me, this isn't a question. That's right. He says, it was listening to your podcast for the past few months that convinced me to subscribe to Trainer Road today. I thought you might appreciate knowing that all of the effort makes a difference, and he says, at least to me. Also, I'm browsing through your website, putting together my first Trainer Road training plan, and wanted to compliment you on the detail and organization. Thanks so much. Awesome. Main reason I put that in there, too, is to thank the team here at Trainer Road, because I know a lot of them are listening right now to the podcast, and they put in a ton of work to that very thing. Pete works as a product manager, so he sees that very thing. So thanks,
everybody
guys.
here is awesome.
We're a full-fledged team.
Yeah.
I mean, the 4 of us get a lot of the limelight, but there's a whole lot of us at work here.
Oh, yeah. So thanks, team, to everybody here. Let's go into Jason's question. This one is a proper question. He says, I'm racing an ultra-distance road race, the race across Oregon, which is 620 miles. This race is about 400 miles longer than my longest ride. What I'm wondering is how to measure effort over that length of a race or ride. Would you use normalized power versus average power versus weighted power, which we'll cover that in a bit, versus heart rate, or just RPE? I'd like to avoid going too hard too early and not being able to finish. Thanks in advance. Love the podcast, guys. So I think first, before we get into our recommendations, some clarifications. So normalized power is a weighted average. However, it's a unique formula. It's not just a standard weighted average. We've gone into that plenty of times, and you can actually go into Trainer Road and search normalized power in our help center, and you can get like definitions on all of these things. But weighted power is effectively the same thing as normalized power, or intending to do the same thing. It's just sometimes you'll see like on Strava, for example, they'll say like Strava weighted power, and that's just to get around. Really, we're talking about copyright stuff there with normalized power. So that's effectively the same thing. So really it's coming down to normalized power, average power, heart rate, or RPE. And when you talk about averaging that sort of stuff, I think that the main thing, if you have a power meter, it can be really helpful. I find, like when we did that, yes, I'll mention the Everesting thing. When we Everested, I put a ceiling on our IF and on normalized power. I didn't say I want to hold this. I put a ceiling on it. And I was totally fine if we were below that. But I think that could be helpful in this case. What do you think, Chad?
Absolutely. I think you're not going to watch your power. I mean, you're not going to watch it that closely anyway. And then what average tells you and even normalized tells you, it could be a little tricky. I mean, how do you even estimate? Honestly, if I give you one piece of advice, it's don't do this, because 620 miles, I can't even fathom that. I mean, is this one of the lean your bike up against the wall and sleep for 5 minutes and then keep going? Sort of things?
One of them.
Sounds terrible. But don't let me discourage you. Good luck to you. I mean, it's impressive in any case. But the metrics are going to be tricky, because if you rely on anything more than how your body's feeling, you're setting yourself up for some difficulty.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll feel really good for a long time until all of a sudden you don't.
Until you
don't. Also, if you're feeling good, go even easier.
Yeah,
that's why it's hard to just go off of RPE, because if you could just go off of RPE,
it's going to seem dead easy.
Yep, exactly right.
It has to. I mean, if you're going to do any hurting, save it for later. It'll take care of itself anyway.
Yeah, you'll hurt later for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we put a ceiling of like 0.6 on us, or 0.62, I think it was my IF ceiling. I just figured out what that would be roughly in average power. And then when we were doing that Everesting thing, that's how we kind of, and it's funny because we were going up Glendora Mountain Road and we're climbing up, and I was like, guys, we got to ease off. And everyone was like, what? I was like, yeah, exactly. People riding without hands, like eating. Like, yeah. And I was like, we actually got to go slower than this. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, because if we don't go slower than this right now, we're never going to finish. I'm sure in their minds they thought if we go any slower, we're also never going to finish. But the fact is, you have to go so much slower than you think. And the other thing about that too is that you may finish and feel relatively, I don't want to say fresh, but if you hit, like, let's say that ceiling and you stick to that ceiling the whole way through, that doesn't mean that you will be entirely exhausted at the end, like it's like a capacitive effort. The fact is, you're going to go across 620 miles. You're going to come across every sort of condition, a bunch of tough climbs, everything else. You want to reside well below your limits, because some things are going to force you over them for different periods of time. Yeah. So if you are flirting with your limit there, it's just going to, once you get too deep in a hole, because let's say a headwind section or a climb or something else, or a rider that you want to stick with, something like that, if you go too deep in a hole, it is so hard to come back out of that hole mid-ride, especially when you've been riding for who knows how long, that many days. So and this kind of goes, I guess, when we're talking about pacing just in general for these endurance events, we get a lot of people asking like, well, this guy's doing race across Oregon and it's 620 miles, but I'm doing race across X state and it's 614 miles. Right. So what should I do? It's totally different. But really with this sort of a thing, we're talking about principles of conservative pacing, and it's the same across the board in that
it could be
regard.
200 miles, 600 miles is going to be pretty close to the same thing.
Oh yeah.
In terms of in certain ways, in a lot of ways.
What about nutrition, Pete? What would you say there?
We did talk about how, like you were saying, with the whole, you can't eat yourself out of a problem. Right? Like when you're 16 hours into your 620-mile ride, you can't just start eating and feel better. So it's the same with sleep too. I mean, your 5-minute naps are keeping you from dying pretty much. They aren't doing anything positive. So you have to start eating early, eat often, eat a little bit. And when you think about it, even if you're doing 150 watts, if you do 24 hours at 150 watts, that's 10,000 calories. I'm sure I didn't do the math, but that's so much fuel that you need to be consuming all the time. And start early because you can't catch up later.
Sip, sip, nibble, nibble.
Yep. ABS. Always be snacking, right?
There you go. That works too.
Bob says, and this is we're kind of gonna roll two questions in because they're pretty similar, but I feel like they cover important distinctions within the same answer here. Bob says, I've been doing some unstructured indoor training for the past month or so leading up to a Gran Fondo, which I've since completed. A lot of that training was for long, steady climbs, so I predominantly trained steady-state efforts. However, I'm now looking at racing crits for the remainder of the season and selected the low-volume build phase plan to shift training to those sharper race efforts. My question, however, is about the volume of the plan. I chose low volume because work travel is disruptive to my routine and also because I still want to ride with my local clubs here and there. With this low volume plan, what are your thoughts on completing some outdoor rides? And he gives, for example, 1 2-hour endurance ride on the weekend and one easy 1.5-hour ride during the week as my schedule, body, and time allows. Will this be disruptive to the plan's overall goals given the added TSS? Part of the enjoyment of cycling is riding with these clubs, and I'd hate for that social aspect of my training to come at the expense of another aspect. So he says, thanks and keep up the great work. I've been obsessively binging on old episodes and as a new Trainer Road user and found them fascinating and insightful. So low volume, that's a common one.
That's one of the beauties of low volume is that it's a really flexible plan. I mean, we have your couple days of intensity covered, your optional, well, not optional, it's scheduled, but your weekend longer intensity covered. That's one of the easier ones to slot in if you have a drop ride or a more competitive ride in place of that workout. Honestly, if I had my way, I wouldn't recommend anyone start with anything other than a low volume plan. Do those 3 days of intensity each week and see how things go. Then start to trickle in exactly what you're describing here, Bob. The 2-hour ride on the weekend, that'd be a perfect Sunday ride to complement this low volume plan, any low volume plan. And then the 1.5 hours during the week, I mean, that's kind of what the medium or the mid volume plans do is add that very thing, an hour, hour and a half midweek, because it's low intensity. You're just adding TSS, growing your aerobic base. It's an awesome way to supplement a low volume plan.
Yeah.
So I think your approach is dead on.
I think that more people should do the low volume plan. Yeah. Like I don't think enough people. I guess I see a lot of people just think I do 15 hours a week right now, and the high volume plan only has me doing like 8 hours max, something like that. Yeah. So of course I'm going to go high volume. But the two things that I think of with that are if you're already doing a ton of riding outside of your structured training, you're not going to want to just cut everything out and just do structure. Yep. So you're going to add in more. And then when you look at how much structure, because all of it is structured within that high volume plan, then that gets really tough to maintain.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. If you're coming at it from, I want to ride this many days outdoors and now I'm going to add a plan on top of that, that's far riskier than saying I'm going to do an indoor structured plan and then I'm going to add the outdoor stuff on top of it, the supplementary stuff on top of it.
And that's where I think a low volume plan gives a person that comes from that high volume side of things the flexibility they need. Like my friend Dylan Nord has been doing recently. He's always gone for the mid volume plan, and he's gotten to the point where he follows a mid volume plan without precision because he's not able to, because of either not able to tolerate the stress or just doesn't have the time, something else like that. And I feel like you're much better off if you nail that low volume plan with 100% compliance than doing like a 50% compliance rate on a mid volume or high.
That sentence there is so important. If everybody listens to one sentence from this whole podcast, nail your low volume plan is way better than flunking your mid volume plan. Guaranteed. I'm in the same. I start with low volume in the fall because I know that at least I get it done and I do it right, and it's I actually succeed in my workouts, right? Like
That's motivating.
That's motivating.
Yep.
Yeah, when you look and you're going through the week and you're like, oh, I missed that workout. Oh, I missed that workout. It's really easy to get yourself to the point where you're like, man, I'm just becoming demotivated in general. It's kind of it's a bummer.
Yeah, it's a bummer.
But I guess when it comes down to choosing the plan, really the two operable principles that we're talking about here are, number one, how much stress you can tolerate, and then how much time you have.
Yeah.
One thing you know, and the other thing you're probably formulating, you're probably trying to get a handle on. So again, just it's the reason to start modest or conservatively, and then go up from there, rather than crash and burn and then have to dial things back and figure out, what can go, what needs to stay, and in the process suffer a bit of a setback.
Yeah, call back to a recurring principle here, but you also, it's really hard to get yourself out of a training hole once you get deep into a training hole, right?
When you realize 3 weeks into your mid-volume plan that it was too much, you're like, well.
And sadly, that's about how long it takes. It doesn't happen right away. You get through the first week, you think I can do this. Get through the second week, think, oh, no, I'm pretty sure I can do this. And then the third week, everything just goes downhill fast.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You might not know instantly, and you might feel like it's fine.
It takes a bit of time.
But then if you've done 3 weeks at too much, then you can take a week to 2 weeks of just doing nothing to even get back sometimes.
And that's not an irreparable spot to be. You can wind up in that third week and realize, oh, no, I'm shifting my recovery week now, and maybe that mid-volume plan is a good fit. You just need to intersperse it with more frequent recovery.
For sure, yeah. And for some people, mid-volume is where they need to be. Some people, high volume is where they need to be.
Yeah.
But we recommend, I personally recommend every time that a person start with low volume if they can, and then they just work up.
Yeah, just because you're coming from a high-volume background doesn't mean you dive right into a high-volume plan. There's a real desync there.
Well, and it's the fun rides, like Bob was talking about. If you need those
Super
fun
important.
rides in your weekly regimen, do low volume and keep your fun rides. Right?
Totally.
Like that's how you ride all season.
Yeah.
It's
from what I gleaned from Bob's description of his training, that those they're obviously important. He said as much, but I mean that's where he derives a lot of his motivation. So the fun aspect of it, the social aspect of it.
Totally. Lucas's question kind of combines with this. He says, hey, coaches, my friend Danny and I love your podcast. We're both medical students on a week-long break traveling to North Carolina for a little cycling vacation. Our question is, how can busy professionals like physicians incorporate a good training regimen and still be able to race and compete at a high level? Thanks a lot, guys. Looking forward to your response. And before we get into this, I just want to replace physician with anything.
Anybody almost.
Stay-at-home mom, replace it with any busy professional, replace it with anything. It's just, I understand the life of a physician is extremely demanding, and we'll get into a specific example of how one person's managed that. But if you're listening to this and you're not a physician, don't tune out. It applies to you, I'm sure.
Yeah, busy individuals, right?
Yes.
With flexible schedules and things happen, whether it's kids, anything, right?
Exactly right. So I guess where should we start on this one?
Well, one thing I kind of want to take issue with, there's not issue, but I just want to point out that you're talking about competing at a high level. That's going to be relative to how much time you can devote. I mean, you can only get so fast on 3 to 5 hours a week. It's not to say you can't get pretty fast, but it's only going to go so far. So that's going to plateau a lot sooner than having 10 to 15 hours to train. So just set your expectations accordingly. You can still be quite fast. It's just you're going to have to be reasonable about how good you're going to be relative to how much time you can dedicate to training.
Yep, absolutely. Like you've said before, it's got to move the needle, right? Like your training has to be always additional stimulus or additional stress than what you normally would maintain in order to improve.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah.
But this is another case for low volume plans. I mean, it sounds like we're kind of one trick ponies here, but the fact is, those low volume plans solve a lot of training problems.
Yeah, problems.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and so back in my indoor power days, my indoor training studio days, my morning class, my Tuesday, Thursday, 6 a.m., and a lot of the time they came to the Saturday morning class. The 6 a.m., at one point this class was 5 a.m., people still came. We shifted it to 5:30 and eventually landed on 6, worked for more people. But the fact is, it's early morning.
Yeah.
Dark and early. They made that sacrifice. They knew, they're going to have to prioritize my sleep, earlier bedtime or lose a little sleep, which I hope most of them didn't do, considering their professions especially. But they shifted things around so that they could make this happen. And it wasn't a big ask. I mean, we're talking 2 days a week. Sometimes they can make that third time a week. And there's travel and there's added time. It's not just a 1 hour bike class. There's a lot of other things that go into it. So it ends up being more than just a small handful of hours. It's a slightly larger handful of hours. But either way, these were, in this morning class, a cardiac surgeon, an anesthesiologist, 1 ER doctor, parents with, I don't think any of them had less than 2 kids. There were probably some 3 and 4. I mean, they were busy parents. There was a lawyer, But it was a very professional crowd. These people had demanding careers and demanding jobs outside of, and that job could have been stay-at-home mom, but it was a job. It required a lot of personal resources, and they made this work, and they got faster. These are the guys who came out of winter into the early criterium series, the local series, and people are asking them, what did you do this winter? Yeah. So it can work. Yeah. It doesn't take a heck of a lot. But again, what you deem high performance and what, you know, a Cat 1 who's training 15 to 20 hours a week deems high performance probably aren't going to be the same thing.
Yeah. I feel like you kind of have to recognize the level of efficiency that you have in your professional life. And then you have to look at cycling and see and kind of reconcile that, because I think a lot of people just go out and they train, or they go out and they ride. And we were just talking about the balancing of the enjoyment that you get from the social aspect or something else, or maybe just the experience of riding your bike. That's important, but at the same time, if you only have so much time, you only have so much time. Yeah. So if your priority is to just enjoy riding, that's one thing. But if your priority is to compete at a high level, then you have to sit back and you have to think, well, maybe I should cut out some of the extra time that I'm just, wasting. And I look at, any ride that I do when I'm outside, it's not as efficient as when I'm inside. And when I'm inside, it is knocked out, it's quick. And then the rest of my schedule is much better off. I get more time with my family, or I have more time to spend at the office, or I have more time for anything else like that. So I know that kind of goes without saying, obviously, with us being Trainer Road and everything else, but find a way to incorporate indoor training as an absolute staple. And once again, it's not about bad weather. It's about getting in the highest quality workout with the most efficiency, right? Yeah. You need high quality and you need efficiency.
Well, you make less sacrifices, right? Like every single ride I do, like my Saturday morning ride balloons out to 3 or 4 hours, even though I'm not training. I only train for an hour and 40 minutes of that somehow. Yeah. But I make sacrifices on Saturday morning to deal with that. But on days where I don't have things to sacrifice, I only have 40 minutes or whatever, right?
It always comes down to opportunity cost. You're trading one thing for something else.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it's just relaxing on the couch, you're trading for something.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And like you're talking about the sacrifice side of things, you will have to sacrifice something, like you said, in order to fit this in. And this goes for anybody, but especially for people, with busy schedules, that sort of a thing. Pete, we have Team Cliff Bar Racing's Ryan Wee. He is going through, I think, his residency right now.
He just moved. He moved from Philadelphia to California to start his residency. So he just finished medical school. And so I did ask him, I said, hey, we have a question that seems up your alley. Yeah. So oddly enough, he sounds a lot like Chad. He said, first, manage your expectations, what you can do. Probably no 2-week stage races, long series. But now that you're committed to racing, identify the tools you have and what they're good for. Learn to love the trainer and do your homework. Do your dirty work on the trainer and get outside when you can.
Yeah.
Smart man.
And then he kind of breaks it down into doing what's effective for you, right? Like making your training efficient for the type of rider you are and the type of racing you want to do.
In other words, picking the right plan.
Right, picking the right plan.
That you respond to and that works toward your goals.
He said...
That's a key issue, too. Respond to.
Respond to.
Don't just keep on doing it. You should be getting incrementally better.
He said, this is specific, planning-wise on the medical school front, if you know your surgery time is time-consuming, don't put your 2 months of surgery before you want to be fast. Put it in the early winter when people are taking a break. Things like that. Yeah. Again, recovery rides, if you're already time limited, doesn't really make sense to suit up and go out for a coffee spin, do it on the trainer, 20 minutes in the morning. He said fun rides, gravel rides, mountain bike rides are all still important. You're already stressing yourself in your lifestyle.
Yes.
Try to have some fun. He said be present 100% of the time when you are training. You're training, right? And if you're being inefficient, it's like totally wasting your time. Yeah. And something is better than nothing. Like I can also attest to that. There's been many times where I do a 30-minute workout or a 45-minute workout. Mm-hmm. I guarantee that's so much. Over the course of the season, that's probably 10 extra workouts that I did instead of skipping.
Yes.
So same type of thing. And then he said, finally, link up with people similar in a similar situation to you in the community. Because if you find people that are at the hospital or in medical school, you have a training partner that's also adhering to the same things that you are.
Don't be the med school student that's like riding with a bunch of guys that like think they want to be pro cyclists.
Like the ones that are only training 20 hours a week because it's a light week. Yeah, don't train with
proper
those
support
guys.
system there.
Yeah, that's a great point with that.
So he said, for me, it was PhD students and other local racers. It's important to stay connected and grounded in where you are and have fun at the races when you do race.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like collegiate racing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. You're in the same kind of like crucible that forges you into who you are.
You have so much time to race. You want to have fun. You want to blow off some steam, but you have a lot of other stressors.
Yeah, that's how it is. So if you have tips on how you've or specific examples of how you fit things in, I know, for example, with kids, Nate's always like mentioned, just train when the kids are asleep. That never worked for me ever. My son, like as soon as he hears anything in the house, he's like, I'm awake and I'm into whatever's going on, So it's just, when my son was young, I couldn't train when he was doing that, and I had to trade off with my wife. And the important thing that I've found there, and not to get into marriage counseling or anything, but is if I do take that hour away from time that we'd be spending it all together as a family, then I need to make sure that my wife has an hour where she can spend away, so then she can get things done too. We have to do that, and it's not like
give and take.
Yeah, not making sure that not running a balance sheet, but just making sure that everybody has what they need. I think is the important thing. So. Because kids is a totally different thing. On the line of stay-at-home moms, I would love it if we could have some stay-at-home moms write in and share what they have done to keep their training online, because I know that we have many of them. I should just say stay-at-home parents who are dealing with this very thing, and it's tough to get that in. So
I can only imagine. Stay-at-home
parents, please let us know. Write in. Just go on to trainerroad.com/podcast, and you can put it in there, or go to forum.trainerroad.com. Jesse's question, this one is going to be combined with the next one as well. Says, this may be a strange question, but I was wondering how much underarm perspiration contributes to cooling the body. I use an antiperspirant deodorant combo, and I've never thought much of it until recently warm weather and using the trainer. I have 2 big fans set up on either side of the front of my bike and windows open, so there's not much else I can do for airflow. Will the body just adjust and sweat more in other areas? Or will the body overheat more easily if you use antiperspirant? Thanks. So and we should probably clarify the difference between antiperspirant and deodorant,
yeah,
right?
because there's a notable difference. So antiperspirant actually, just like it says, keeps you from perspiring. Deodorant just basically paints scent over your sweat. So, and to the same end, to some extent, the difference being, I think in the past, antiperspirant has gotten a bad rap because of its aluminum content. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's first talk just a bit about the details of sweating. Mm-hmm. You've got a couple kinds of sweat glands, and we're talking the armpit in particular right now. So your eccrine and your apocrine glands, and they both contribute to cooling to some extent, but the ecrines are the heavy hitters in this case. So the way antiperspirants work is the aluminum salts in them, and it's usually aluminum chloride, clogs the sweat glands, or clogs the pores, so the sweat glands can't emit sweat, and
plugs them up.
They can't become, they can't intermingle with bacteria and create body odor. So there's, like I said, there was a big concern for many years, and there still is, that those myths are still out there, and they're not hard to demyth or debunk if you do just a little bit of homework. that say that aluminum is tied to cancer and dementia and Alzheimer's and kidney disease, and each of those has been independently vetted to an extent where we can definitively say no, absolutely not. I mean, the amount of aluminum it would take, first off, is quite a lot, not what you're going to get in antiperspirant. And secondly, our pores don't open up and just let this flood into our bloodstream. They open at the surface, but they don't open down lower. So the aluminum's not getting into us. And it's such a minuscule amount that even if it did, the poison's always in the dose, and it's just not enough poison. Yeah. So there have been no causal links demonstrated. I mean, look everywhere. You can't find a thing. And there's a lot of instances where they outright disprove it.
Right. Yeah.
So don't sweat that.
Yeah.
Didn't even mean that.
That's pretty solid.
And then the whole preventing of sweating out toxins. If I wear antiperspirant, I'm not gonna be able to sweat out the toxins. Again, that whole toxins thing, let's just let that go, please. You have a liver and you have a couple kidneys. That's all you need.
That caused a fire on the forum.
That's your sweat. It's funny stuff. It's good stuff. Good for a laugh.
So I guess getting into the cooling side then.
Yeah. So this is where it gets interesting. And I know this isn't. Well, this is what you asked, but it's it's going to diverge a little away from antiperspirants. And when you think of cooling, it's better in the terms of endurance sport to kind of see it as cooling cooling the outside in order to cool from the inside. And I'll explain that a bit. But you think of your head, your hands, your face. There's a researcher at Stanford in particular who has an unpublished study on the effects of cooling the face on performance. And I know it was unpublished a couple years ago, may have been published by now, might be out there. The soles of the feet especially, but also the arms and the legs too. And a lot of this ties back to this these anastomoses. So, or single as an anastomosis, these arteriovenous anastomoses, and all these are as little blood shunts. So when you think that your atrial system or the blood away from your heart connects to your venous system at some point, it typically takes place in the muscle through the capillary beds, right? But these little shunts actually precede those capillary beds and can turn off or basically shunt the blood flow straight across from the arterial back to the venule. So they bypass the capillary bed, and this shunts the blood to the skin rather than into the muscle, if I'm understanding it correctly, and allows you to offload heat. And they're particularly prevalent in your hand, the palms of your hand, your forearms, and the soles of your feet, your armpits, groin region, and like I said, the arms and the legs. And basically all they're doing is allowing the blood to rise to the surface. You cool the blood, and the blood, well, in the way I'm going to describe cooling, the cool blood makes it back into the system and cools the core temperature. This is where the dousing your arms and your hands, sticking your hands in cold water, dousing your arm warmers with water and letting it evaporate. But either way, we're keeping the skin cool, especially in these surfaces that have these anastomoses, these shunts. And then this kind of led me down a road. I just a couple studies I want to touch on, but they each bring up interesting points. NIBO back in 2001 showed that a high core temperature actually influenced or degraded or limited maximal voluntary contraction. So the muscles simply couldn't fire as hard because core temperature was elevated. Then a few years later, 2007, he went on to show that or demonstrate that brain temperature also reduces muscle recruitment, which shines a light on just how integrated a phenomenon cooling is.
Yeah.
And then in 2012, Salka showed that, and this was particularly interesting, that high skin temperature, not high core temperature, was the primary limiter in terms of endurance performance, aerobic performance.
Wow.
Which brought up the question with me, is it cool skin that cools the blood that then cools the core, or is it cool skin that lowers our perception of heat and then has an effect on central regulation, on our brain? I mean, really, it doesn't matter, but because the fact is, in any case, we get these parts of the body wet. We subject them to some of the recommendations I'm going to make in a minute here, and the same effect occurs.
That's fascinating, because I think that we've all probably felt that at some point. I was mentioning to you guys that I think during a ride, it was 2 years ago, I was on my mountain bike, and I remember thinking that like I am melting and overheating, but it was from my feet. Like I felt like my feet were genuinely on fire, right? And it wasn't like hot spots like, when you have bad fit. That wasn't like that. It was just like so much heat. Yeah. And I felt
your
like...
feet and your hands offload a lot of heat. And our feet, I mean, we have no other possibilities other than to put them in shoes.
Yes.
I mean, hands, you can not wear gloves. Hands, you can hold on to something cool, but your feet are kind of where they're going to be.
Yeah, I was just going to say that is an argument, perhaps the first valid argument I've ever seen for not wearing gloves, right? Is to give yourself more, because in most cases a glove, when we're talking about the palms of our hands, because that's where more of those anastomoses are, when we're talking about that, you don't really have, and in that case, you usually have Clarion or I think that's what it's called, something like that. Clarino. You have Clarino, or you have like leather on the base of your hand, right? And that's not going to help a whole lot with offloading heat.
Probably a gel pad or something in between.
Yeah, or if you have one of those.
Layer.
Yeah, so it's probably the first valid argument for not using gloves that I've seen, which is very much in vogue with mountain bikers, is to not use gloves. And
really?
And I like my fingers, so I do use gloves. But
and if you just don't crash.
Yeah, that's also the other option. Just don't crash. Yeah. So I guess getting back into sweating then.
Yeah. So just really quickly, I mean, we have 4 different ways to rid the heat rid the body of heat, and when the ambient temperature is greater than the body temperature, evaporative cooling is really all we have to rely on. So sweating is hugely crucial. This is worth mentioning that it's compromised in humidity. Duh. We know this, but that does mean you have to take hyperthermia or heat illness a bit more seriously in these more humid environments. And then when it comes to addressing heat-related illness, we always see the same recommendations. Apply cold, wet cloth to wrist, neck, armpits, and or groin. So the same regions of the body, armpits are one of them. So obviously there is a fair amount of heat to be shed via the armpits. And if we plug those up with antiperspirant, we're not doing our body any service in terms of thermal regulation. It might not come at the high cost of performance, but maybe it does. I don't know. But basically anywhere, you cool the areas of the body anywhere that the blood travels close to the skin. So again, we can cool the blood, get it back into the core, or get it back into the body and cool the body. So when it comes to recommendations, again, we're talking about cooling from the inside. And this is quite simple, I mean, especially if you're a runner. It's a little more challenging if you're on a bike. But especially in the case of running, when you pour water on your forearms and your hands, just what Nate talked about last week, the impact that can have. Because our hands and, again, the feet, but the feet aren't really available in this respect, are huge heat offloaders.
And think about on a bike, like you said, bike versus running. When we're on a bike, we usually have our forearms, depending on where you're at, but your forearms are front and center in the sun. And then in many cases, we actually have them rolled slightly out because they'll be on the hoods. And when you're on the hoods, then, you know, your actual forearm gets more sun, the underside of your forearm, not just the top. Sure. So it's a particularly, I guess, we're basically just like laying our hands in front of the heat, right? Our hands and arms.
And it's a pretty solid argument for those white arm warmers that you see more prevalently these days, and keeping them wet if you get the opportunity. I mean, grab a bottle, drink some, douse your arms, shoot it down your back, whatever.
Yeah, interesting. Huh.
So in this is a side note for sure, but it brings up some interesting points. Is there's a company called Avacor who has these cooling gloves and heating gloves, and I'm pretty sure there's something. I think they make plates too, heating plates for rewarming hyperthermic patients in emergency cases. But the fact is, they warm the hands or they cool the hands, and they see. When cooling the hands, they see performance benefits. Because again, we're offloading heat, but they've also seen these benefits in strength training, which is really interesting. And I mean, these were actual studies, not just experimentation, tomato, but they had, I think a guy was doing pull-ups, did so many pull-ups, couldn't do any more, repeated this over so many days, then they started involving the same amount of pull-ups to failure, put his hands in the ice water, go, and magically could do more. So there were impacts on the strength side of things too, which is interesting, at least food for thought.
Interesting.
But one recommendation is, with kind of what I just said, if the water's too cold, or if you're using ice and holding onto ice, this creates almost the exact opposite of what you want. You get a localized or a peripheral vasoconstriction. So all those blood vessels that we're trying to, either way, the blood vessels constrict, that pushes blood back to the core. So the cooling that we're looking for with the vasodilation doesn't happen. So the water can be too cold. Ice is probably not a great idea unless you're ingesting it, which again, Nate touched on this last week. Ingesting cold foods does wonders in terms of reducing core temperature.
Because we're cooling it from the inside like
exactly. And I mean, he said slushy drinks. If you have the opportunity, like in running, or even taking a bottle, if there's ice in it and you can chew some of that ice, that's a great way to go about it. And then I forgot about this one, but frozen grapes. Frozen grapes are terrific. I mean, just swallow. You know, I mean, you can chew them, I suppose, if your teeth can take it. But you swallow them, and you have this little ball of sugary ice in your stomach. It's kind of great.
Yeah, great idea.
And fruit sugar at that. But this, with the whole ice de-recommendation or non-recommendation, if you choose to use a cooling vest, make it a cooling vest, not an ice vest. Again, cold contact. Although, I guess that would be in the context of pre-cooling, so maybe it's not quite as big a deal.
And I think just so nobody gets confused, when you're putting like stockings full of ice in your pockets, it's more for the water that's dripping down.
Evaporation.
It's the evaporation content. It's not actually the ice being against your skin.
It's not that localized point of ice.
Yeah, or when you put it between your shoulder blades, that's so it's dripping water down your back. And
so that it's like a time-released thing as well. That's the other benefit of having those.
It's the slow drip of someone squirting a water bottle on your back.
Yeah, so just get wet, evaporate, wet, evaporate. It works wonderfully well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about one thing I've wondered, because I feel like I've felt this, but once again, our lives are far from scientific, right?
I felt this.
I felt this, their quotes. I remember one day riding up in the California Alps in the region over here by Markleeville, very hot day, and I forgot my sunscreen. I used a different sort of sunscreen. It was extremely thick, and when I put it on, I felt like I was going to explode in heat. And when I was going up a climb, and I was not sweating at all, and I was wondering if the sunscreen was clogging pores.
So maybe in the moment, I could see that being, you're just adding another layer of something to your skin. So that maybe the cooling has to work a little harder to push the sweat through.
Yeah.
So maybe momentarily, but I couldn't find anything at all that talked about topical anything being applied to the skin and causing any issues with cooling.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like in that scenario, it was probably because I was riding really hard and it was hot.
And it was hot, yes.
Yeah. And so maybe it just shifted your focus to how hot you actually were.
Yeah, exactly.
But I did dig a fair amount, and I couldn't find anything.
Interesting.
So I don't think that's a relevant concern.
Yeah, because like it's very much bro science, as we call it, in the sense that like I'm putting some over my pores, right? Because you think you're clogging them, but
and I guess I mean if it's really thick, dense stuff like embrocation or something,
yeah,
maybe. But I mean, you put embrocation on to stay warmer, although that's not really how that works.
Yeah. They do have cooling. They do have cooling embro now. Yeah.
Okay.
You can get that. Basically, I think it's just menthol, right?
Yeah.
I would assume. Yeah.
Yeah.
Still probably not doing a whole lot, just tricking the mind. But
hey, maybe that's all it takes.
Exactly, central governor. Right?
There's a case to be made.
So this kind of links in with this. John says, can a base layer really help keep you cool? And is there any science behind the idea? It seems counterintuitive that to keep cooler, you put on an extra layer. Thanks, from John. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I think you guys can answer this as well as I can.
Yeah, I do use base layers.
I use base layers also.
So do I.
We were talking that there's probably been a global shift in technology and fabrics.
Yes.
And when we all started wearing base layers, it was maybe more important then.
Yes.
When your club fit jersey that's you can't see through, that
Extremely
if you pour water
dense.
on, it just like rolls off.
Yes.
That didn't work as well as having a base layer right next to your skin and getting that extra evaporative area.
Yeah, because
Right.
that's the theory behind a base layer, right?
Yeah.
So put something next to skin, a layer that is porous, but also has some sort of height to it.
Yeah.
And then what that does is that would allow for your sweat to collect in that area or allow for air to travel in between the jersey and your skin.
Yeah, hopefully both, right?
Yes.
Pull sweat away, allow for more evaporative cooling benefits.
That's the theory behind it.
Yes.
And when you have a jersey that's thick or that isn't very porous, like I'm thinking of like the shiny skin suits that are from back in the day, right?
That look like ski suits.
Yeah, they look like, yeah, exactly. Spider all over them and stuff. But those things really did not breathe well at all.
Yeah.
But these days, like I just got my new like custom kits, and it's even the non-vented one is very much like it allows air to travel through.
Yeah, the materials they use now actually look like base layer materials
do.
a few years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah, they do. I love base layers on the trainer. I like just my bibs in a base layer over a jersey is really comfortable.
In place of a jersey.
In place of a jersey, yeah, exactly. If I'm
over the top.
yeah, no.
I'm getting really weird with this.
Yeah. But then another time that I use base layers is I'll use a wool base layer on warm days, or sorry, on cold days.
Yeah.
Because that's we're just talking about heating there. But on cooling, it's very rare that I use a base layer on a hot day anymore. Just because the jerseys are so good at being able to wick and being able to help in the evaporative cooling process.
Yeah, and it helps if your jersey fits.
Yeah.
And when you, like Chad was saying, if you hold it up and you can see through your jersey, that's probably going to help with the cooling aspect.
Yeah, your jersey should have some sort a good amount of stretch when it's fitted on you, and when it stretches like that, I think a lot of the time that deforms the fabric to the point where it's going to allow more air to cut through. The only other thing that I would say is that it does. I do think there is a level of class with a base layer. I know this is beyond the scope of what we're talking about.
I was actually going to mention that.
Yeah, I feel like there's when I'm like, let's just say you're riding through a neighborhood and your jersey's unzipped and you're riding by with just your jersey flapping around and there's a family outside. Like I feel a little bit weird when I'm doing that.
Especially
when it's just your necklace hanging down.
or even worse, a heart rate strap that
that you protrude over the top of.
Not a good look.
Yeah, so I feel like there's a certain level of class that's associated with that. And for what it's worth, I have worn summer specific base layers. I've worn them in very hot conditions with a jersey that probably didn't merit a base layer, and I didn't feel an extra layer of heat, or I didn't feel excessively hot.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you really would in that case if it really is an effective base layer. An effective one, I feel like, once again, has fabric that is very porous, and it's got some sort of height to it to allow it for better wicking.
I think good base layers are worth it. Like if you're getting, it does matter that you're getting a good base layer, but I wear, even when it's about as hot as it gets, I still wear it.
Yeah.
I pour a lot of water on myself, and so I think it's always wet. There's more wet layers on me. It's got to work better. Yeah. And if that's wrong, don't tell me, because I'm going to keep doing it.
Let's go into Vernon's question. He says, "Hey all, I've recently been introduced to BCAAs, and I'm wondering what role they can play in cycling performance and training. Should I be using them as a cyclist?" From Vernon. And we've discussed BCAAs before on the podcast, but I figure it probably merits a revisiting and probably a deeper discussion into kind of protein supplementation and
Absolutely.
everything.
And what's cool about this is we can kind of bad cop, good cop this.
Yeah,
Because I'm
geek
going
out.
to tell you why I don't think it's worthwhile, and Pete might have some other information.
Well,
Pete's got a nutrition background, so
Yeah,
it'll be,
and I think this is really fun where Chad gets to do the deep dive, and then we can break apart the science, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, so first off, what are BCAAs? They're branched chain amino acids. So just a different type of amino acid. They are one of the essential amino acids. So anytime it's essential, it's something the body can't make, and we have to ingest. We have to get from other resources.
Can I stop you there really quick? And that's where I think a lot of the hype, misinformation, and marketing behind base chain amino acids comes in, because the word essential is attached to many things, whether it be oils or whether it be anything else. And a lot of people, and I feel like there's a lot of sludge to work through to get to the truth kind of behind BCAAs.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
if you have preconceived
there's
notions,
a bit. They're easily marketable. So
They're
I mean, they
easily
make money.
marketable.
They make money.
Oh, that they do.
But they are amongst the building blocks for protein. I mean, amino acids, that's what they are, whether they're essential, whether they're BCAAs, doesn't matter. And then the branch chain are three essential amino acids in particular. It's leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And the leucine is the one that you see touted mostly, and I'll get to why that is in just a minute. But basically, all we're looking for here is muscle protein synthesis, and we have to weigh that against, or we're looking for actually muscle protein balance. So the level of degradation, because we're always degrading muscle fiber and we're always synthesizing muscle fiber. So we want a balance that's on the positive side. And if I can gripe for a minute, I've never understood positive and negative balance. It feels like it's either imbalance or it's not. And it just doesn't register.
And the positive is above 70%. And
is that what it is?
I don't quote me on that, but it's a percentage based. It's not even.
Yes.
So
okay.
I'll retract.
And there's a big deal made about that, where you want to have, like, when we're talking about leucine and everything else, you want to have it above a certain threshold. For that sort of thing.
It doesn't really help.
Otherwise, people say the BCAAs are useless. It's a whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're looking for a positive muscle protein balance, especially myofibrillar. We want the contractile tissues in our muscle fiber to grow.
Makes sense.
So that's this positive protein balance is the goal of BCAAs, EAAs, whatever. My frequent resource for matters like these is almost always Asker Jukendrup and Kevin Tipton. mysportscience.com or .org maybe.
Yeah.
And they mention, or Asker mentions, that leucine turns on protein synthesis. Nobody will deny that. That's irrefutable, because it stimulates the mTOR pathway. And we've talked about how the mTOR pathway and the AMPK pathways are two different pathways, and strength training and endurance training are never going to cohabitate happily, et cetera, but it does in fact turn on this pathway. So it stimulates protein synthesis, and that's all good and fine. But what we're finding, or what they have found, is that it has to be ingested with enough protein to actually optimize this level of synthesis.
Yep.
You can't just have BCAAs and expect to get big muscles. You also have to give it more protein, more substrate for it to work with.
Makes sense. You're turning on the car, then you need to give it gas, right?
Yeah, not just a little bit of gas. You got to get, well, it's not even gas. I mean, we're building here. We're not fueling.
It's like putting only ethanol in your gas tank or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
I don't even know if the gas analogy holds up, because this isn't fuel, this is building. So we're building new tissue here.
Got it.
So what we're looking for is to maximize that muscle synthesis, and that happens when we have intact protein. Whey is one of these proteins.
Yeah.
Most obvious protein sources are. Chicken, for instance, has more essential amino acids and BCAAs than most supplements out there. So have some chicken. If at all possible, have it via real food.
Yep.
And then people say, well, I don't want to have a big bowl full of chicken prior to a workout. I'm certainly not going to eat it during the workout. That's fully, I get that.
Yeah.
But protein post-exercise has been demonstrated to be equally, if not more effective than pre-exercise. So it's not that timing issue where we have to have our BCAAs or EAAs just prior to a workout is so important, and I got to get it immediately after my workout is so important. It's just as loose as everything we've learned with glycogen replenishment. As long as it takes place over the course of the day, you're probably all right.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody's different, right? Like,
if you have events that come up right after it, we've talked about that before, but that window, because I'm sure somebody's going
with glycogen for sure, with protein probably a lot less so.
Yep, exactly.
And then one more thing from Kevin Tipton, and one more bad cop aspect to contribute here is that there was a study that showed that branched chain amino acid BCAAs did reduce muscle soreness, but this didn't have a positive effect on muscle function. So there is data to support a reduction in post-workout muscle damage, but it's equivocal, meaning it's not. unequivocal.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
It's still bit open for interpretation. So the scientific data to support BCAAs is, quote, pretty weak.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So unfortunately, I agree with Chad.
It's pretty weak.
So we're going to back up this.
But it's interesting. Kind of what it always comes back to is real food. Getting nutrient-dense food is always more beneficial than supplementing. Always. So if you think that you need supplements to fix something, always look at what you're eating in addition to that, right? Like.
Your diet's deficient somewhere.
There's a deficiency in your diet, and that's what you have to address the diet first, and then start thinking about supplements.
Sure.
So that's kind of the interesting. If you're supplementing BCAAs, you probably could have eaten a better pre-workout meal. Yeah. But there is a couple interesting. The only I did see your reduced soreness study, which I think is interesting. With that, I would love to see what else they were eating. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But because if you are lacking protein pre-workout or post-workout, if there's just not quite enough, and the BCAAs actually did knock it up, I don't know. But I agree that not much to be said for BCAAs, except for there is an interesting study about BCAAs increasing exercise capacity. Very small, like 1 or 2%. It's the same if you ingest BCAAs before, and who knows? There could have been some like electrolyte mix in with it, and that could have been. Yeah. But let's agree that BCAAs you might be better spending your money on other things. Probably are.
Yeah, I can see that.
And one important thing, as this always gets back to like protein versus BCAAs, having the correct amount of protein and not just BCAAs after workout is what your body wants. It doesn't want just the small building blocks. We've become the way we are by eating full blocks of protein.
Yes.
So I've never seen this chart. We could drop it in the forum. I've never seen the kind of the relative increase in duration in muscle protein synthesis following post-exercise supplementation with different protein or protein mixtures. And whey gets a nice big spike like 45 minutes after ingesting, which is why whey works pretty well for making you feel a little better post-workout, right? And so I've tried a lot of different post-workout proteins in my life. I've done soy, I've done pea protein, I've done all sorts of different ones, but I've never seen them kind of charted out like that. And I do feel the best with whey post-workout, and that's what I use to this day, because I feel that works for me the best. And again, one of the interesting things is it's based on intensity and based on your body composition. Kind of the worst and best part about nutrition is what works for me doesn't work for Chad, even though, it's always like that. So it's always taking some fine tuning of yourself. But, remember it's the 3 to 4 carb to protein ratio, that if you're only taking 20 grams of whey protein after your ride, you'll feel okay, but add some carbohydrates with that. It's just the basic stuff, and then tune from there. So start with the big window of this is probably correct, and then start tuning and slide one way or the other. But I've taken BCAAs in the past, and I don't take them anymore because I don't think
it's kind of interesting because I see a lot of cyclists, or I should just say athletes in general, see BCAAs as a replacement for protein supplementation post-workout, that sort of a thing. And while it could perhaps complement it, it may not be necessary for eating a healthy diet, and it doesn't stand on its own. And that's an important thing to see. So that's debunking perhaps kind of a big myth. So protein supplementation for cyclists in general, it's really about helping you. It's really post-workout, making sure that you're recovered, assuming that you have a sufficient amount of protein in your diet outside of that.
I still think the importance of protein intake is underplayed when it comes to endurance athletes.
Yeah.
And I just wish we'd get over that because it's crucial. It's hugely important. We beat the heck out of our muscles, and we do it for long periods of time. We do it with extreme forms of abuse. I mean, sprint workouts and VO2 max workouts and long threshold repeats. And I mean, the explosiveness of racing and doing it for hours on end. We're hard on our bodies. We're hard on our muscles. We have to replenish the protein that we're breaking down.
I think there's like this cultural void there because we don't want to seem like meathead gym rat people, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, we're like, let's really just look at what's happening. We're putting a ton of stress on the muscle, so we need to rebuild it.
There is one interesting protein supplementation study I found that it actually there was a couple things to think about based on mice. Protein supplementation actually caused some other long-term health effects, negative health effects, but they gave them not nutrient-dense meals in addition to the protein supplement. So which is what I feel like a lot of people do.
Yes,
like they think that if I'm getting my protein in, I have this shake, it's a meal replacement or whatever, it's okay. And so it just goes back to make sure your meals are quality, spend some time picking out your protein. Like if there's so many, just Google
a whole podcast.
Yeah,
with that.
Google some
As in like a weekly podcast for years. Yes.
Yeah. Just do a little research when you're picking your protein from the most basic level, and then don't think of it as a replacement. Think of it as a bonus. If your diet is optimized, protein helps. If your diet is not that optimized, protein, you're not even filling the bucket.
Yeah.
It's just one component.
It's just one component. And so I think if that's the one thing we can get through on this one, protein post-workout supplementation is very good, but if you fix your whole diet, it'll make a bigger difference than just getting...
It's just like any other form of supplementation. It's not a Band-Aid. Or if it is a Band-Aid, try to heal the wound. Don't just slap a Band-Aid on it and consider it fixed.
I think there was one more thing, right?
Optimizing performance. I think this is the point I tacked on. I've said this a few times, and I just want to hammer it home yet again, is that optimizing performance doesn't always align with optimizing health. We do a lot of things that definitely sacrifice small aspects or sometimes large aspects of our health in the pursuit of high performance. And it's a tough balance to walk. I understand some athletes have to prioritize performance over all else at different times in their lives. If they're professional athletes, if they're on an Olympic track, most of us don't fall into those boats though. So
yeah. And finally, I think that an important thing that a lot of people perhaps forget, because you can spend a ton of money on protein and BCAAs and all these other things. Right? You can spend endless amounts of money on all of these things, but unless your diet is really like we're talking about, unless it's balanced, high in nutrients, everything else that you have, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to spend this much money on that. Because when you look at this, there can be a lot of actual financial costs to you trying to do this, and if you're just trying to replace proper nutrition, you're missing the boat entirely.
That's the single best rationalization for shopping at somewhere like Whole Foods. I mean, your grocery bill is massive, and a lot of people see only that. But I don't include all these other supplements and all these other things that I'm lacking in otherwise inferior food.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm spending more on my groceries, but all told, I'm spending substantially less than I would if I tried to Band-Aid with all these different supplements.
Exactly. Yeah, and actually, if you're cooking it all yourself and doing it's not. I mean, it is expensive, but you can roll some of that supplementation money into your grocery bill, and I bet things will be better.
And honestly, you start cooking at home and you get pretty good at it, you won't be nearly as tempted to eat out as often. It's a crazy relationship. Or a correlation.
Yeah.
Sebastian's question.
Let's do it.
He says, "Hey guys, thanks as always for the excellent podcast. Having taken from it the idea of A, B, and C races, I laid out my plans for this season, but I've realized a problem. I don't understand B or C races. This is extremely common. You are not alone, Sebastian. Yes. Entering a race without the intention to win seems incorrect. So what is it that you intend to do when you start a B or C race? Simply play around with tactics, but still plan to contest at the end? Thanks." So this is really common. What I mean is that it's pretty easy to understand the core concepts, but putting them into practice, it is so common to see somebody racing in a C race like it's a B race, or B race like it's an A race. It's common to see these things getting confused. Yeah. So we should probably kind of just redefine what A, B, and C are.
I mean, you can, yes, maybe do that first.
Yeah. Okay. I think like the first thing, so A would be like your biggest goal of the year.
Yeah.
And then Pete, you can probably provide some alternative definitions for this. But A would be like, your biggest goal for the year. So I'll use my my race season, for example. A is national championships. You may have more than one A race. Like if you have like a whole series of races, you might pick a couple races from that to make your A events. If you have 2 Ironmans, for example, you might have 2 of them. But
you can have an A duration or an A period.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a multi-week period where you want your fitness to be as high as you can get it.
Yep. But that's like, and then if we're talking about like big events like Ironmans, you just want to make sure that you have enough time to really prepare properly your body for those A events. A B race, I usually look at a B race as something that gives me the chance to, so it's lower priority, first of all, but it gives me the chance to be able to test out things that are close enough to my A race that I feel like I can apply that experience later on.
Yeah, a close simulation to what you're gonna face.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how I finish in that race in the end, but I do want to make sure that I can finish well if it emulates the race that I'm going to do for my A race, or if it's going to be very similar course, similar weather, similar something like that, similar course profile. Those are good things to make it a B race. And then a C race is basically a replacement for a workout for me, and that's like local racing, that sort of a thing.
Yeah,
it's nothing too big. You kind of had a creative way of making sure you have your A, B, and C right.
Yeah, and I think all Jonathan's points are also valid, or they take this in addition. So when I plan my season, I think of it as a training problem, right? A, B, and C are actually training problems because if I do my training correctly, then that's what's going to lead me to show up the best. So for an A race, you do taper, right? There's a real taper. There's a genuine build and a specialty and all of that. For B races, I always just kind of, they're like a C race plus. I don't really have a B race. So with a B race, I probably change my previous workout to something lighter.
Yes.
The same workout, but probably a little less volume. Even that is sort of like, I don't know. My body does better with adhering to structure more than like really those mini tapers don't do anything for me. I usually slow up. I don't know. And then a C race, I always treat it as like an extra workout. So if I can do my workout in addition to the race, all the better. So if I can do an hour in the morning and then show up to the Tuesday night or ride an hour before the Tuesday night race, because then I'm guaranteed to have a good workout in addition to another good workout. The race is always worthwhile. But I always try to win. So all of those races, I'm trying to win.
Exactly.
I'm gonna throw the dice a little differently, but I'm still trying to win.
So your build into those races is just a little different.
Yeah. And I've got to say with like with races, I go into them absolutely without the intention of winning. However, if I get to the point where I have a chance to win, then I give it a shot. But I do go into like our Tuesday night criteriums and road races that we have in this region. And in some cases, I go, tonight I want to win. In some cases, I say, nope, tonight I don't care if I win because the higher priority is on focusing on repeatability.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever gone into a race without the desire to win.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's always
desire to
there.
win.
Yeah.
I mean, based on, because I see C, B, and A races as just... They recognize my level of fitness. I know that I'm not bringing a heck of a lot of fitness to this race, so that just makes it a C race. I can only expect so much. Not to say I can't win. Not to say I can't get in a break and just let three guys tow me to the line and have the best sprint. I mean, it can happen, but my expectations are set accordingly. I know my fitness is low here. B races, I know my fitness is a little better. I have higher expectations. I'm going to be a little more aggressive as a racer. I'm going to try a little harder. Maybe I can do something. Whereas an A race, I go into it, I've done everything necessary to win this. Now it's just how things play out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that when it comes down to it, like those are three different ways that you can kind of describe A, B, and C races, which hopefully that helps people understand them.
And there's nothing wrong with going into each and every one of these wanting to win.
Oh,
but
yeah.
you can't expect to win it every time. And especially on top of the fact that you look at high-level riders, and the wins come few and far between.
Yeah, if you only race to win, then bike racing probably isn't the best fit.
Yeah,
because it's you're not going to win. It's not like football where it's you basically everybody wins, half everybody loses.
Yep.
It's you, and then there are a lot of odds against that.
Consider your odds. Yeah. If a football match for a game, for instance, I mean, it's 50-50, right? One of the two teams is going to win, but you go out with 120 racers on a course. The odds are not quite as favorable. favorable.
Instead, I have to look at racing as, I look at it as like a metaphor for larger things in life, right? And for me, because like I was doing a hill climb time trial the other day, a mountain bike one, and my son was in my truck, and and they were leapfrogging me and cheering, and we finished the race, and he was like, "Why were you riding up the mountain?" And I was like, "He's 2," question. And I was like, "That's a great question." He's like, "Were you running away from a bad guy?" And I'm like, "No, I have no real reason for doing this, right?"
Yes.
And that's bike racing, because I'm not paid for my results, right? And the majority of people listening to this aren't paid for their results. But the thing is, for me, it's the whole thing is about improving myself, right? And challenging myself and seeing what I can do, because, I may feel like I know what I can do right now, but it's really fun to be able to push those limits and explore those. And I feel like it brings a ton of other benefits into my life.
Yeah.
And that's why I like racing, is it gives me that level of responsibility. I have to kind of, go to the judgment bar very regularly and say, "Have you done your work?" And I feel like that's a really good thing for me to do. So that is like a whole process of improving myself. That's how I see it. Mm-hmm. So A, B, and C, they all build toward the big judgment day of A, so to speak, right? And
bigger and bigger judgments, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. And they just add on to each other. So C, it's lower priority. I always do want to win, but I need to keep my eye on the prize with that A race sort of stuff. And I guess that's kind of the point. Like, I really like, Chad, you brought up a great one, and I feel like I should hammer this home for people, is C races where, your fitness may not be great. It's B races, your fitness is getting closer. A races, your fitness is there. And that's what you're building for. You may have a C race right before your A race too. You may have that. Sure. So your fitness may be good. But that's another good way to kind of wrap your head around prioritizing them. So, because many people I see, when they start building out their race calendar, they're like, "Hey, I looked at the A, B, and C priority blog post that you have on Trainer Road. It's great. I have 17 A races."
Yes.
Yeah. It's like, well, you probably
3.5 months long. Yeah. I'll get them all in.
Be choosy. And that's also hard for a lot of people, I think, to just really put themselves out there and say, "I have one event and I need to do well at that."
I was going to say, I'm a culprit of that. I hate A races. Like, I love lots of B races, but A races are stressful.
I'm with you on that.
Like, John can rise to the occasion. I'm just like, maybe one of my B races will turn into my A races after I win.
That's kind of how A races work for me.
Convertible notes.
Exactly. B race, it goes really well.
Yeah.
That was an A race.
That was an A race. Just planning it the whole time, really. That's funny. But I think it's a good exercise, because life will put you into those spots where you have to have an A something, where you just basically have to prep for something big or have to perform, that sort of a thing. And if anything, this, cycling can be a metaphor for that. But I don't know if I have anything else to offer on it.
Yeah, I don't think either. I mean, typically when we're talking about ABC races, we're usually talking about lower level racers too. Yeah. So these aren't racers who race for jobs, but if you were racing for a job, you may never see a win. I mean, if you look at the pro peloton, there are riders who will be out there for a better part of a decade and won't get a single victory. Yeah. Either their role doesn't designate them as that sort of rider, or they just don't quite have that level of talent. But this, they're still very good bike racers, and they still want to race a lot, and they still derive a lot of enjoyment from it. So it's not always about winning. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Different measures of success.
Different measures, and it even happens to people. Happens and category upgrades too. You can go from a 4 to a 3, and it's a lot harder to win. But you still enjoy racing as a cat 3, right? Oh yeah. So remind yourself that you can always try to win, but
nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. Derek's question, he says, "Love the podcast. I've got a lot of great info through listening. I'm new to racing this year and recently had a pretty bad crash. I broke a rib and pulled a muscle in my lower back, making it hard to walk, as well as my bike and helmet, which cost about $600 to replace. It's been 2 weeks and I've improved a lot, though. I've been riding on the trainer and I feel a lot better. I understand crashing is part of the game," and he mentions, "I'm still a Cat 5 and have only finished 3 races. So that means he has 7 races to go before he's out of Cat 5s, right?
Yep.
And mentally, I feel good about getting back to it. My partner, however, thinks I must be the stupidest person on earth to consider racing again. I have a lot of experience with riding with small groups, and I'm a decent bike handler. But after talking to other racers in the area, it seems like the race I was in is notorious for crashes every year. And I feel like a bad crash isn't necessarily inevitable. I know the things to look out for: don't overlap wheels, stay toward the front, etc. And if I ride smart, I think the chances of crashing that badly again are still fairly low. I will admit, though, another hit to my body and wallet like this might put me off racing for good. So do you have any advice?
So there's a lot of good observations there, and we've all been through this. I mean, the longer you ride bikes and the more you race bikes, it's simply a when. It's not an if. It's going to happen. The degree or the severity is anybody's guess. I mean, you talk about don't overlap wheels, position yourself at the front. Those are all great ideas, and those will maybe narrow the possibility or reduce the possibility or likelihood of crashing, but it doesn't remove it at all. I mean, you just watched the Giro a couple days ago, and the crash happened right up front. It took out most of the field, left like 13 riders to head to the line. Yeah. So we're talking well over 100 other riders were affected by a crash. Yeah. They were, positioned quite well, and it still affected them. But it does happen, and there isn't any way around it. And my single bit of advice on this, well, I actually have several, but probably my first and foremost is to make your body bomb-proof. Pete and I are both strong proponents of this. We're not the lightest guys, but when we crash, we can probably get back up and keep on racing. I mean, I've never had a crash debilitate me, and I've had a fair amount of crashes.
Yeah.
I've always been able to finish the race.
I have one amazing story about running into the back of a car, and the car was hugely dented, and I just got back on my bike and kept racing.
Fine.
Yeah, because it was okay. But yeah, yes, bomb-proof bodies, you can withstand so much more than if you are really cycling shaped.
And as an amateur rider, I mean, I would rather be a little too heavy on the climbs than too frail on everywhere else.
Yeah.
Look at how many mountain bikers miss the season with a broken collarbone compared to road riders.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, look how many road riders literally fall over and break bones.
Yes, exactly right. It's just a tip over. And meanwhile, you see like with mountain bikers and everything else, they're falling hard and regularly, but the nature of their sport requires them to be a more fit and more robust athlete or person, more padded, right?
Yeah.
When they hit,
muscle works really well as padding, right?
Super
yeah,
well.
and when you slam onto your shoulder and you actually have structural strength to your body instead of just relying on the bones, the rebar that holds it together, that rebar isn't as stressed, right? It really does make a huge difference. And you don't have to be a huge, jacked dude going to the gym. You don't have to be some super fit person in terms of that. You just have to. It's simple strength training stuff because
you can do a lot with. You don't have to be overly muscular to be to have a strong body.
Because I'm far from even as built up as you guys are, but I have very hard crashes, and I've crashed on the road. I got taken out at 35 miles an hour on the road on rough San Francisco streets, and I should have probably been hurt more.
Sore and rashed up, but
that was it. Another hard crash at Utah recently that I really should have hurt more, but it didn't. And I think it's just because of that really helps. So because you said crashing really is it is an inevitability. It's going to happen. That's one thing you can really do to help give yourself more confidence in that event. That hey, you know what? At the very least, I'm doing my part to make sure that I'm strong. Yeah. And at the very least, you may still get injured, but I promise you, if you have a strong body and a habit or a lifestyle that revolves around that, your recovery will go by faster at the very least. Yep. So it's really going to help.
And that's just one bit of advice. Like I said, my first and foremost, but there are some races that are known for their crashes, and early season races are usually more known for their crashes. So you can choose to avoid those, or you can race it and just decide you're going to time trial at the front, and you can modify your strategy accordingly. If you know the dangerous turn, make sure you're positioned as well as you can before it every time. If it rains, don't be afraid to pull the plug. Like, it's already a dangerous course, and now it's a wet course. Forget that, I'm going home.
Yeah, remember that you're not paid for this, right? So you don't have to race. Yeah. And if you think about, like, I already paid an entry fee. Well, hospital bills are more expensive than an entry fee. So don't let
a night
that
sleeping on road rash. I'd pay $35 to avoid that.
Oh, yes, I'd pay more than that. It's very, very tough. Something else, too, I think, like, people inherently assume that Cat 5 is dangerous, but I actually, my sojourn through Cat 5 was pretty safe. Yeah. And I don't even remember a lot of crashes, and actually when there were crashes, it was always when we were with Cat 4s and Cat 3s. It doesn't, I know that there's a reputation there that it's dangerous. I know that you have 7 races left with that, and 7 races might be a whole season or 2 of racing, depending on what accessibility you have to racing. But that doesn't necessarily mean, like, just don't think that when you go into a Cat 5 race that you have an absolutely more dangerous environment than anything else, than any other race. It's just bike racing. And in many cases, actually, Cat 5s tend to give each other a little more space and it gets a little safer. So
yeah,
might not be in a bad spot.
Yeah, and I think one of the good points that I saw you make is that you talked about some things that you could avoid or that you do to avoid crashes. And as a person I don't crash that much, knock on wood. I'm a firm believer that you can avoid a lot of crashes just by paying attention all the time.
Yep.
And I pay attention all the time because I hate crashing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's people who crash and there's people who don't crash. The people who don't crash still get caught up in crashes sometimes, and it still happens. But the people who crash pretty regularly.
They tend to crash regularly.
Yeah.
It's very true.
They make bad decisions or inattention or whatever. But there's a reason that one guy has a bunch of elbow scars.
Yes.
And it's not because he's unlucky and, it
always keeps happening.
Yeah, it just keeps happening to me. But being aware that there's things you can do to stay out of crashes, pretty much just saved you 50% of the crashes right there.
In my opinion, it comes down to good decision making. And if you're a good decision maker, you'll be able to avoid crashes. Not every time, but certainly much more.
Yeah, most of the time.
And you have to be a vigilant racer and a hyper vigilant racer as the race wanes on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you're always going to race with dumb riders and you're going to race with careless riders, but every rider becomes a tired rider at some point, and they're effectively all the same thing at that point in the race.
Yes, they are.
So even if they're the best racers out there, if they're really gassing themselves and they're just barely clinging to reality, trying to do whatever to hang on to that last super fast couple of laps to set up for the sprint, whatever it may be, they're effectively those dumb and careless riders.
Oh, yeah.
Even though they're highly skilled.
Yeah, so that's one thing. If you feel like you do have very good decision-making capabilities amidst stressful situations, whatever it may be, take that as a vote of confidence for yourself.
Yeah.
And be like, you know what? And perhaps that last crash that you had, it really wasn't a situation where it was your fault. Maybe it was your fault. If it's your fault, learn to figure out why that happened. And then just commit, say, that's not happening again. I'm not going to let myself do that. And if it is something where somebody else caused it and you got into a crash, once again, take a vote of confidence and say, you know what, that was something out of my control. This is going to happen every once in a while, but as long as I'm vigilant, I can reduce that and it'll be safe. Really just thinking of trying to get him back into the point where he feels okay with making that risk of racing again.
And this is a bit of a stretch, I know, but I still am a firm believer in jiu-jitsu or judo or anything that teaches you to fall. Gymnastics works just as well.
Oh, I agree.
Learning how to fall. If I had a nickel for every time I saw a crash in slow motion and looked at all the outstretched arms, I'd be a rich
It's
guy.
amazing,
because,
right?
I mean, and that only ends one way. I mean, those limbs go unfavorable places, and that's how you break collarbones. You don't break collarbones by rolling on your shoulder. You break it by trying to stop the impact with outstretched arms.
Yes.
Learn how to fall.
Yeah, mountain biking helps with that also.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Right, you just fall more all
You
the
fall
time.
all the
Tuck
time,
that
so
shoulder.
you better figure it out soon,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And-
Cyclocross too is another good one that you can do.
Yeah, and just having these skill sets makes you more confident, right? Like if you're a confident racer, you crash
Absolutely.
much less.
Yes.
And I would a lot of the one last point I'll make is I make moves or I will avoid a hypothetical crash that I can see coming more often so 75% of the time I'll make a move for a crash that probably could have happened but didn't, but I would have missed it either way. And I deviated from my line or whatever, but there was no crash. But it doesn't stop me. I still do it every time because if it takes a little bit more energy, but I miss a crash 25% of the time, like
Just missing the potential crash. Yeah,
and it happens all the time.
I did that a couple times just this Tuesday night. With that racing you and I were in. Let's go into Brian's question.
If I could make one more small point.
Please, yeah.
I've crashed and had maybe one of my best performances ever post-crash. The crash itself was actually kind of liberating. So you can put your own mental spin on it, your own perspective on a crash. It hurt. I was rashed up. I did have blood trickling down. I looked pretty tough and all that, but
Nice.
I raced really well.
Yeah.
Because it was just like, I crashed. That wasn't so bad. I mean, it was a huge confidence boost. And your crash is definitely more severe. So that's not the sort of crash that you have and you think, oh, crash is not that bad. It sounds like it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
But just because you crashed doesn't make you a bad bike racer. Doesn't mean it's going to happen every time. Just don't get too in your head when it's, in a lot of cases, just not that severe.
You bring up a good point. Crashing isn't, it doesn't have to be. We build it up to be life and death in our minds before we have crashed. but
it's
it
often
really
far more scarier than the reality of it.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep. Yeah. Well, great point, Chad. Brian says, hey guys, over the last 2 years, I've gone from road riding to gravel endurance rides. And my question is, up until the 80 to 90 mile mark, I can consume solid food, but I really struggle after that. I don't get on great with gels. So this is something I will get used to, is this something I will get used to? Or can I train my mind and body to accept it? I usually end up wearing half the food as I struggle so bad. Gross.
At least it's coming out that end.
Yeah, exactly. Says any advice, actually, we're only assuming it's coming out that end. Yeah.
Yes,
Says
right.
any advice would be greatly appreciated. So this is actually super common. I mean, he's not
especially with gels.
unique. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's people call, getting gut rot or gel gut, that sort of a thing.
So
is
back
real.
in the day, they called it goo gut because goo was like the only gel out there.
Yeah.
And now it's just gel gut because there are a ton of gels. And the problem with gels is that they're really concentrated, but they're pre-chewed. And so the stomach doesn't have a big job. So they clear the stomach fast and then they make it to the small intestine where they sit. And this is where all the problems arise. So if you know you don't handle them very well, probably avoid them. If you think maybe you can handle them, you're just probably not hydrating enough to make up for this new pre-chewed bolus of food in your small intestine. Hammer it home with a bunch of fluid. So it's not to say that gels are not to be used, but they're going to have to be used either use an isotonic gel like Science and Sport,
or Martin.
Just recognize that you're going to, or Martin, or just recognize that you're going to have to follow it, chase it, precede it with some water.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I've never been able to tolerate gels until I tried Science and Sport and Martin ones.
Same here, but I think I had a habit of underhydrating.
Yes. Yeah, exactly right. I don't think that I wasn't taking into consideration, I need to hydrate equally with this. I was never doing that. And that's why I was having a hard time with it. So you can still use them as long as you do that. I mean, if top athletes do it, then, certainly we can.
And this same thing can be said with too concentrated carbohydrate beverages. So, the whole fluid in your bottle, food in your pocket, doesn't have to be that way, but just recognize that if your carbo replacement comes via fluid and it's a hyper concentrated concentration or just too concentrated for your gut, you're going to have to chase it with some actual water. You can't just drink more of it because that's just going to put more of that same stuff that's causing the intestinal distress in your intestines.
Yeah, and I do see people do too concentrated carbohydrate drinks. Like they'll be like, well, I'll just put an extra scoop in.
Yeah, I've made that mistake so many times.
And they're like, well, it's going to be hard. I'll put an extra scoop in.
Yep.
This is kind of one of those fine lines where I would always prefer people to fuel and drink optimally until you run out. Don't save water for the last hour of the race.
No.
You're like raking yourself over coals for 3 hours. But if you properly hydrate and eat for 2 hours and you run out, I guarantee the last hour of the race is much better than if you like drop it in. You're like, I only have a third of a bottle left.
You're
you know what?
describing
Just drink it.
Yes,
You're describing my
exactly.
entire Cat 5 through Cat 3 career. Seriously. But so as the longer the events get, the more demanding they are on your body. Your digestive resources effectively dwindle. So you may have been able to tolerate real food to start, then you had to move to gels, then you had to move to liquids, then maybe you moved to glucose tablets because that's the only thing you're going to tolerate, but you do recognize a need for sugar. And a quick plug for glucose tablets, they're a great method, especially when you need a quick hit of sugar. If you have a few of those tablets, and there's not much to them. I mean, we're talking like 6 grams, 4 to 6 grams.
I've actually never even used a glucose
tab.
tab.
And they're
Pretty
delicious.
small amount.
But they absorb directly. I mean, they are glucose. So you stick them in your mouth and you're already getting them into your bloodstream. I mean, this happens in the mouth and it continues, of course, through the digestive tract. But it's a quick hit of sugar. So when in doubt or when desperate, or maybe you realize you've reached that point where you're not going to tolerate anything else, those tablets are quite handy. And then, so I think part of what you're dealing with and what we've already kind of talked about is that the gut lining or the mucosal layer is a delicate thing. And once we've negatively affected it, it doesn't self-correct over the course of a workout. And the workout itself provides its own level of stress on top of it. And then you're dumping on too concentrated forms of food and probably underhydrating. Seriously, poor gut.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have enough resources because you're pulling everything right. It's like already underpowered, and then you're putting hard things into it.
Exactly. So you're asking your body, and you're also asking your body to give up water that is very valuable elsewhere so that it can digest this stuff, or it doesn't, and it sits there and you get ill. I mean, it's just a poop storm.
Yeah. You're full of them tonight.
Love your gut is some advice I have for you, and it's advice that was been given to me. Probiotics, prebiotics, again, another could fill a whole podcast with that stuff. Proper diet. Let's go back to that. Just a proper diet will amend most of these issues. Because, and then if at all possible, whether it's due to intensity or the duration of the ride or the timing of the ride, you're early in the ride, eat whole food to start things off. Because that just the concentration and composition of a lot of these manufactured foods don't work for a lot of people. Yeah. So there's just another mention of how important it is to try and error, and error again and again and again in training rides, in B and C priority races. That's
Yeah, and especially early in a long event. This weekend is the Lost and Found gravel grinder coming up. I don't think any of us are doing it this year.
Nope.
But we've done it all in the past, and I've started out with solid food in that one, and then ended up trickling down for sure.
Is that
but
the 100-mile jobber?
Yeah. It was, Chad had a seriously tough day.
Pretty sure I didn't get anything right that day.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe my pacing, but definitely not my hydration and nutrition.
Yeah. And the reason I bring this up is because you said in this case, Brian, that you've gone to gravel endurance rides, and I know that it's very much like part of the culture with the gravel thing they have these aid stations like at Lost and Found. I think that they had like bacon quesadillas and margaritas at like one of the early aid stations. Yeah. Chad can attest. At like one of the early aid stations, or maybe that was the Sagan Dirt Fondo.
The Sagan.
That's right. Yeah. Which is now the Truckee Dirt Fondo.
They all bleed together. They're all just dim recollections of any of them.
So I know that, but that's very much like part of that culture, right? So when you do have those sort of things, and if you do want to like not pass up on that sort of stuff early on in the race, that is the time. And you've kind of found out just by necessity the fact that your body can tolerate that early, and at the end it kind of can't.
I'll tell you what, you're gonna eat stuff like that early on in a race. You better be going very easy.
Oh yeah,
none of that bacon and cheese. It's not going anywhere quickly.
I ate a lot of. They were adding extra bacon to the quesadillas, and if you had a margarita in your hand,
you can't say no to that.
You can't say no to that. I wasn't going that hard.
I've found a huge help for me was changing over, and really the principles behind it, I think, is, and I always get this wrong, I think it's like the 2-to-1 ratio of glucose to fructose, something like that.
Yeah.
3-to-1, something like that. There's a ratio, and it's important, and I don't know it, but it's helped me, so that's the important thing. And I've noticed, because before I do have a relatively fragile gut. I can't handle like a lot of different foods, but I found huge success in changing over with that stuff. And I got rid of, I don't even have, like, I actually add just electrolyte powder to my mix, just a gram of it. And that's like it. But outside of this, I just use that Marten stuff, and it's just been so good on my gut. And some days, like for cross country racing, for example, I need to have some water every once in a while, because when you're huffing and puffing and inhaling dust, sometimes you really just need to clear out the throat, clear out the mouth. So in that case, I just switch over to their gels, and it basically is just the same product. It just has a different texture, right? So,
and they're what, largely maltodextrin?
Man, I don't want to jump out on a limb and say, because I'm unsure right now. So, but it's been helpful. But I think that the principle behind that is, if you do your research into things and you test a lot, I mean, it's been years for me testing, and I found something that works for me. And I think that's the principle that we're getting at here, is you do have to do a ton of experimentation. But if you are going to be taking in gel, that sort of stuff, like you said, I think probably the most helpful principle is to be making sure, and it's not just gels, it could be blocks that you're taking in. It could be anything like that. It could be the carbohydrate drink. Just make sure that you're bringing in enough water with that. And if you drink a ton of water with it, it'll help. It'll help. Yeah,
honestly, if you're going to have a bottle of carbohydrate fluid on your bike, you're going to have to also have a bottle of water with it.
Yeah, one to one
and way around that.
Yeah.
The only thing, I don't know if this is racing, but I always see this happen. And since you said wearing half your food, people who just like sprint through the aid station and like grab a bunch of things and go off riding again. If you stop for 10 seconds and like drink and then like swap your water and like take some food, eat a half banana, the chase is not that hard. And I guarantee it's never worth it to like, it just gets me riled up when I see people like almost crash and then don't drop their bottle or spill their food because they were so worried about the...
If you're leading the race, it's one thing. Sure, whatever. But, if you're not leading the race...
It's an exciting environment. I think it's foreign to a lot of people. They don't do it often enough to be habituated to it to the point where they can actually relax and slow down and recognize, I don't need to save 10 seconds right now. I mean, I understand how people get wound up. But just take a breath, take a step, and... Fill
up your water bottle.
Gravel's very different. Last question from Matt, and then if you're joining us on the live streams, we'll hop over and answer a few of those live stream questions that you've submitted through YouTube and Facebook. And you can usually join us Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific. Next week will actually be Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific. So just a heads up on that one. From Matt, he says, hey guys, a year ago, I realized having a coach was too much pressure. So I went back to Trainer Road and improved immensely. So thank you. Good to hear. That's awesome. And some people, they don't need the extra pressure there, and they're plenty accountable to themselves. They just need the structure. So, yeah. He says, 2 weeks ago, I raced a crit after a busy work week. It wasn't an A race, but due to the work demands, it looked a lot like a taper week, and I got second. That's my first podium in the Cat 4s. I was due for a rest week after that, but elected to treat the taper week as a rest week and prepare for the next big race. This is super common.
Yeah.
He says, that race was today, and I was definitely overcooked for it, and I had an awful day. There are crits almost every weekend for the next 10 weeks. We've kind of made reference to this question throughout this podcast.
Yeah.
But what's the right balance between tapering, resting, and holding a high sprint capacity for some more crit podiums throughout this 10-week series? So first things first is I want to touch on this very thing. We talked about this last week in the podcast, I think, of how I don't often follow a prescribed rest week because life gives me rest weeks.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of how life works.
If you take a rest week, life is guaranteed to give you another one right after that.
Yes, exactly.
That's how my life works.
Train as much as you can.
Yeah, and if you if you train as you can, then you'll find that those rest weeks will work their way in. So first of all, don't feel bad about that. But I guess let's talk tapering specifically, and then maybe we can, and I guess it'll be inherently tied to the crit series, but then we can talk about how to maintain fitness for the whole series. So I guess, like, Chad, can you give us just like a very brief concept of the whole intention behind a taper leading into an event like that?
Yeah, just to basically eliminate fatigue. I mean, you've built your fitness up to a point, but it's masked by a certain level of fatigue, and you can't unmask it without a bit of recovery. So over the course of a taper, you want to ditch the fatigue, unearth some of the freshness, and we do that by toning the volume way down but keeping the intensity high. You don't ever want to get too removed from the intensity at which you started your taper. I mean, you still have to keep that. So we're just trying to dial down the fatigue and let the fitness that's there expose itself.
Yeah, it's a great example of it, right?
Right.
Certain events require more tapers. You talked about prioritizing races and
Some
how that
events
can
don't.
combine. Some of them
And I
don't.
think that's where we're going with this one.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, this is a race and train sort of approach. There's no real room for tapering in there, but I think Pete can speak to this much better than I can.
Well, and I think there's kind of two things. Depending on how your preseason went, determines what your weeks look like, right? So if you're playing a bunch of catch up, which some people train and race really well at the same time over a 10-week series. And if they were really light over the winter or they took a long time, they can still get in a couple structured rides, get their races, and get faster over the course of the 10 weeks. The problem that I see more often is that if you've done a big winter and you've already raced and it's June, right? And everybody's tired in June because everybody started in November.
Yeah.
That you just can't keep up that same what you're used to, what you've been doing previously, and races are hard. And one of the things with the weekly races, it's stressful, like in your life, and it's more stress than just the 45-minute criterium that than people feel. Yeah. So we're lucky here. We have a Tuesday night series and pretty solid racing calendar on the weekends or the drop ride on Saturday. And depending on how your season goes, a lot of people are pretty good with just maintaining a Tuesday and a Saturday intensity, maybe a sprint day in there and a long ride, but a fun long ride. You're not adding any volume when in June to like bump your fitness up for August 1st, you know? So I think dial it back and make sure you're giving it 100% on one workout a week and your race, and then try to fit in a sprint workout, especially since you are saying sprint capacity. Another 10 weeks of sprinting will make a way bigger difference than adding an extra workout or two a week.
Yeah, you're effectively in maintenance mode with a bit of refinement. I mean, that's all you're describing. So we're not looking to build fitness. We're just looking to hang on to what you already have and maybe touch up certain things. And when it comes to criteriums, sprinting is a great thing to touch up.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was just thinking about this week. I was like, if I was just doing a crit series, every workout I would just dash in a few sprints sort of a thing, like to make sure that I'm keeping up on that sort of a thing. Because if it's just a little bit, at the very least, I'm going to refine my form, hopefully, or hold on to good form, right? Yeah. But it's an important thing. And actually, with mountain bike national championships coming up for me in July and starting my specialty phase, it's something that I'm, considering doing.
Yeah.
Because right now, with the specialty phase sort of thing, I'm kind of similar to this in the fact that although I don't have weekly races that are just like my A race or anything else like that, I'm kind of in a maintenance mode to some degree, or sharpening the blade. I'm not really focusing on building fitness.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a maintenance mode either. I mean, you can build fitness over the course of something like this. So if you have like a 10-week series, you can come into it with not a whole lot of fitness and race yourself into shape. And I don't mean just utilize the races. There should be a couple structured days of intervals there, or at least one, and then maybe a long ride or something. But you can start, week 1 and be kind of not very fit. And over the course of it, use both the training stress, the racing stress, and then hopefully a bit of supplementing with some easier stuff or not, and get progressively faster over the course of that 10 weeks, such that you arrive at the last 8, 9, 10 weeks and do quite well. Maybe see your best fitness all year.
My biggest advice for this one, and it seems like low-hanging fruit, but is to make your easy days within this time period truly easy.
Crazy easy. Or just stay off the bike if you can't manage that.
Because I feel like that's where a lot of people misstep, and then they start to see declining fitness, is because they go out for an easy day, or what should be an easy day, like me yesterday.
Yeah.
And they do what I did yesterday, which is not go easy enough.
Yeah.
And then you kind of fall into this trap where you're wondering why you aren't doing as well at races, and it's just because you're putting on too much fatigue, and you're not able to maintain it.
And then you go a little harder next week because you're like, well, I'm a little off, so I'm just gonna work through this one.
Yep.
And then you just
medium hard all the time.
Question your existence, and everything falls apart.
Yeah. Think of this Frank Shorter, very famous runner. His easy days, people would run with him. I mean, like novice runners who were in terrible shape could run with him on his easy days. That's how easy they were.
Yep.
And then you go to a track day and break your legs.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I mean, he knew.
I think that's one of the amazing things about professionals is you'd be blown away at how easy they go on their easy days.
Yep.
Yes.
Like 100 watts easy for 45 minutes. The one thing I was thinking about this is you also don't really have to taper anymore. You already kind of got your rest week. The maintenance, I don't think, as long as you're not doing too much, 10 weeks of maintenance the whole time, you shouldn't really, life will throw some curveballs at you, so you might get something, but I wouldn't plan a taper week in this.
Not for any of these.
Not
if they're every weekend.
Not if they're every weekend.
Yeah.
It's just, it is what it is.
Same.
This is a racing train.
So should we jump into some live questions?
Let's
You guys
do it.
up for that? Cool. So once again, we're live on Facebook and YouTube, and you can join us there. It's good fun. Somebody says, can we get a race report from Jonathan and Pete's races from the other night? We're actually, Pete and I are in the process of throwing the data onto the footage. We aren't going to do like a race analysis because we both feel like we didn't do a great job of executing on a specific thing that would teach you, but we are going to put the races up. So then if you want something to watch, you can check that out. And we have a playlist on their full race videos that you can check out on YouTube. So you'll be able to watch through them. At the very least, you'll get to see some interesting stuff. Any highlights, I guess, that you would share?
I was going to say, it was like, there's been kind of this, I don't know if racing, well, it's our local racing has kind of started to jump into this trend where everybody chases everything and then we all look around.
Yes.
So
next?
So it's really boring.
It's a different. There's always something going on, but it's not the dynamic that we really hope for, where we have something going up the road and chasing and that sort of stuff.
So, but John made it really hard. I made it hard sometimes, and it's been coming down to a bunch kick with like a reduced sprint.
Yes,
like
every time. 8
or 10 guys at the end every time, or only a few guys get dropped, and that's hard. There's some powerful sprinters here that are hard to beat.
Hard on an open course with a narrow lane and divots in the middle.
It's an interesting thing when you have just enough fitness in the group for everybody to latch on, but not enough fitness
to really do anything.
To really change it up. It's interesting. It's really common, but. It'll be interesting to see. I think I pulled back 7 brakes, so that'll be something.
So you were the guy who was nailing everything back.
Yep, that was me. Well, it's kind of interesting because with racing, sometimes so like everything can follow a rhythm, and if you miss that first move, you're kind of like on this syncopated rhythm with everybody else thereafter, where you're like kind of like no, I can't recover in time to make that move.
So you just shut it
So
down.
I look around, nobody else is going to chase it back, and they're all looking at me. So I'm like, yeah, you know what? I will do it. This is a C race, and I need to get in a good workout. I'm okay with that. But and then I was hoping that like we could kind of offset that rhythm, and then I would be the one that would be able to get up the road.
Sure.
But it just kept hitting so that it didn't work out that way. It wasn't on direct counters. It was just, tough. So.
It was a weird back foot race. Like I would say the same thing. It's also, everybody can hang. Right?
Yes, it's frustrating. Yeah.
Well.
Ash says, in bed recovering from a cycling crash with a car. Live trainer keeping my cycling nerd self entertained. Get well soon, Ash.
Yeah, get well.
Sorry to hear about that. Okay, so somebody says, or Isaac says, is there a power metric that just tells you your average power when you are actually pedaling? As in, it doesn't account for time when you aren't pedaling. So I'm not sure I fully follow the question there. Perhaps you guys understand it differently than me. But I think that what you're talking about is genuine, because you can see average power live in the moment, and you can average that out over 3 seconds. You can make it instant.
I think he wants an
3
average
seconds,
of
5
just
seconds,
pedaling
10,
time.
30 seconds. Not sure I understood. Do you guys
No,
grasp that one
I guess
any
you
further?
could take out zeros.
Yeah, you can do non-zero, and then you can do
what does that tell you?
all the way up to 30-second smoothing, or sometimes you can do even more depending on the head unit.
Yeah, when you eliminate non-zero pedaling, though, it's
Yeah.
not really representative of what's going on.
I'm curious as to the use case that you would have for that, Isaac. Let's see. Okay. Oh, somebody says, have you considered developing a strength training plan that you could add to your calendar? For example, picking a strength training plan to pair with Sweet Spot Base. It is something that we have considered. And for now, you can check out on YouTube or on blog.trainerroad.com. You can check out the strength training for cyclists exercises that we recommend. But yeah, it is something we
Do you want to
considered.
Easter egg them, Chad?
No.
No.
I mean, I don't know. I just
It's
don't know what the
something
timing is on
it's something we've considered. We're
We've
moving
thought
forward.
about something. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will share my favorite exercise at the moment.
Please do it.
That I was just doing in the other room. Just renegade push-ups. I think we've done these before.
Like renegade row push-ups?
Renegade row
Yeah, I don't think
push-ups.
they're part of the video.
I think they are.
Are they?
I think they are.
Okay, well, they can get surprisingly heavy, and you can still manage them as you get stronger and stronger. And there's nothing that more closely simulates what it's like to ride a mountain bike downhill than those. Because it's almost a static lower body and a whole lot of work for your upper body, which is very much what they are. But in any case, it's a broadly beneficial movement.
Oh,
and
it's so good.
And you can weight it quite a lot, and man, does it carry to the bike.
Oh, so much. And you'll do it when you do it. You'll notice one foot if you're really holding like your trunk and everything else engaged. You'll notice one foot wanting to lift.
So much fires, so much muscle fire. So if you're not familiar with what these are, it's just you get in a push-up position. You have your hands on dumbbells. So it's best if you can have those hexagonal dumbbells that don't roll. Really nice dumbbells that don't roll. It's a pretty narrow grip, so the dumbbells are pretty close together, and a really wide stance. Feet set wide, and you simply do a push-up. And once you get to the top of the push-up, you pull one of your elbows past you, so you're rowing one of the dumbbells. Set it down, do another push-up, change sides, set it down. So you do 2 push-ups for every set of rows, and just keep banging them out. Do a ton of them, make them heavy, and only do a few of them. Find a middle ground, whatever suits you. But I'm telling you, it's an awesome exercise.
Yeah, that core, it always comes back to you're really pedaling from your core, and the stronger your core is, the stronger you're going to be able to pedal, right? It's like that's what you're pushing against. So
yes,
remember.
Cam says we need new race videos. I have two that are edited and ready to be published very soon. Pete and I are recording another voiceover today on a race, so that he and I were both in.
Yes.
So that'll be interesting.
There's more.
So we have more coming. Don't worry there. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Kevin says, Coach Chad has a lot of advice about in the saddle form and efficiency, but what about out of the saddle? Any helpful tips to ensure we're practicing good form out of the saddle?
There's a lot of that too. I'm guessing chances are you're early in Sweet Spot Base 1 because in Sweet Spot Base 2 or in Sweet Spot somewhere, there's a fair amount of work.
In traditional base as well.
Yeah, okay. A fair amount of instruction in the workout text, the on-screen instructions that helps you move in and out of the saddle, ride out of the saddle, where to position your body fore, aft. There's quite a bit of stuff in there. I mean, even with sprints, especially in the traditional base approach, there's a whole lot. And you don't have to do that training plan to get those workouts. Just go look at the training plans and pluck out some of those workouts. There's a lot of focus on the 3 different types of sprints that I utilize.
Oh, yeah. I think one big thing, so there are a couple of things where you actually touch on in the workout text is that transition period, doing so smoothly. A lot of people, when they transition to standing up, they basically stop all their momentum and they stand up and then they go.
Not fluid.
But we're talking about making a fluid movement. And if you think about your back wheel and a person behind you, ideally when you transition, you don't move that back wheel to such a degree that it causes them to, because I'm sure you've ridden with a group and it's so frustrating when you're riding behind somebody that stands out of the saddle
that rear wheel
and they
back
just
into
shove it right back into you. And then when they sit down, they do the same thing once again.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to happen and it's inefficient.
And then once you're up, getting comfortable with riding out of the saddle is something that absolutely has to be practiced. It's not just
Yeah.
something that happens. It doesn't matter how strong your body is. I mean, you can be you can be a full-on gymnast and hop on the bike and you can still be sloppy out of the saddle.
Yeah.
Yes.
So absolutely. Spend some time practicing it, and you'll be surprised what you can tolerate once you've established a good out of the saddle riding form. You can stay out of the saddle for crazy lengths of time.
I've noticed that I see this with a ton of people where they just don't have a level of comfort with bike body separation that really hurts them when they stand out of the saddle.
Oh, yeah.
Because their bike doesn't move. Like they stand up and it's just kind of, and that requires so much excessive contraction in your body that doesn't contribute to pedaling.
Yeah.
And if you watch kids that ride BMX bikes and when they ride and then they coast because they only have one gear and it's small, right? And when they coast, what they do is they have one pedal down and then they usually have like a really exaggerated position where their bike is leaned to one side and they're coasting and the knees canted in, exactly right. But it's that foot down thing. And you should practice that. I know that sounds silly, but you should coast on your road bike standing up with one foot down.
That's a good point, yeah.
And when you do that, you'll notice that there's this interesting counterbalance relationship in between that downward leg and then the other hand. And you'll get actually really comfortable with riding with your bike leaning at a weird angle and going straight. And if you then just after coasting for a while like that, switch over to the other side, and hopefully you'll get more comfortable with that sort of separation, and it really helps. And it unlocks a ton of efficiency and power when we're talking about out of the saddle.
Yeah.
It can go too much too. You can't be the person that just flops your bike excessively, so don't do that. But it's definitely something to look to.
Yeah, a little exaggerated movement out of this. It should feel exaggerated, but it won't look exaggerated, right?
Yes.
Like if you feel like you're totally tensed up and everything's really tight, I guarantee it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't translate.
It doesn't help.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one thing. And film yourself or ask somebody to film you when you're riding and look at that. Then turn on the Giro and look at the other guys and be like, wow, I look just like them,
Look at
or I
most
really
of the
don't.
other guys.
Yeah, not all of them. Guys like Contador, for example, had such a unique, weird style out of the saddle,
You'll
right?
notice that you'll recognize a good climber when you see him or her.
Yep, exactly right. Okay, let's see. Maybe just one or two more. Oh, cool. We have Shane Miller, GP Llama, joining us. And congrats on the little one on the way. So to you and Vaughn, that's pretty cool. That's good stuff. And okay, so somebody says, I'm just looking for a general tapering period. For example, how long before an event? And should I combine carb loading with this, full rest or not? So that really kind of depends, I would say, on the event once again, because if it's a criterium, you probably don't need to taper a whole lot for it.
No, there's a very detailed in Yuko. Here, I can't think of his name right now, but there's an entire book, a very common resource, and for whatever reason, the name's just not hitting me right now, on tapering, and it's an elaborate book. So this is a potentially elaborate topic, and I mean they're all different ways to decay the taper, and when you should start it relative to the amount of volume you're doing. Anything you want to get right to set yourself up for a good race day pretty much has to get dialed in that taper week. So your hydration, your nutrition, there's a lot of things to outside of what you do on the bike to get proper so that you're.
I would say that's almost the thing that people overlook the most. Get extra sleep, eat extra well, hydrate. Like it's bringing your body up to snuff too, not just your legs and not just
because you're not going to fix anything on race day. It has to be fixed in that taper week. That's where you get everything back in line.
Something to be said for this too is don't wait until your taper week to suddenly eat really well. Because you may, like, for example, like that week you switch to Whole Foods and you're like really high quality stuff. Your gut's going to be like, hold on, like this is a big change and it's going to need some time to adjust that. So don't just start eating clean for your taper. This is something that you need to work in and then just double down on.
But typically, the more volume, the more training volume you're carrying into your event, the longer your taper is going to be. So if you're a low volume trainer, the taper doesn't have to be a whole week. You can get away with probably a few days.
Yeah.
If you're doing a fair amount of work and you recognize there's a high level of fatigue, maybe you do need a full week-long taper. If you're logging 20, 30 hours a week heading into an Ironman, a 2-week taper is absolutely in line. So the amount of training stress and fatigue you carry into it will influence how long the taper is. And then again, like I said, how you decay the taper, it gets a little technical, but basically, man, if you just half your training volume and keep the intense rides, and just trim everything down, emphasize recovery over, I mean, if you had a typical 2-minute VO2 max workout where you had 7 intervals, now maybe you're doing 3 or 4 intervals. The recovery's been between them were 2 minutes or even down to 1 minute. Now they're back up to 3 or 4 minutes. So you're still hitting the intensity, but you're giving yourself a little more rest. The workouts are shorter. There's just a lot less, at least half a reduction in your training volume.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the intensity has to stay high. Don't even dial it back a little bit.
Nope. No, and if you're a multi-sport athlete, not in the pool, not on the run, maybe on the run. Actually, I take that back. If you were going to dial intensity back anywhere,
And be on the run.
last thing you want to do is incur a running injury the week prior to your event.
Yeah.
But
that's a sure sign to me that we are not intended to run. I know that's not true, by the way. But so thanks for joining us, guys. We appreciate it. And you can join us, like I said, live next week. It's going to be Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And please continue to send in those questions. They're awesome. We wish that we could address them all, but we're only so many humans here with so much time. But please continue to submit them. You can do so at trainerroad.com/podcast and join us in the forum. Search for episode 206. You'll find this episode in there and all the show notes. We'll be updating that as we go. Producer Bryce is filling in for us today, and he isn't able to switch all the cameras and add all the show notes live. So if you notice something that we mentioned in here and you're in the forum, you can throw that link in there. That would be really helpful. But we'll get to it throughout the next couple days here. So thanks so much, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Thanks
everybody.
guys.